But what I like to emphasize here when this topic comes up, and I'm glad you asked because it's a great question, is as I started, the ability to take the foundation that was there and increase that capacity was in me the whole time. All right. It's not like when I was in the hospital at Walter Reed, some mad scientist walked into my room and like rammed a metal spike into the back of my head and uploaded work ethic like Neo in the Matrix. For me, it took getting my legs shot off by a machine gun to get access to it. But the point I want to make, and I'll emphasize it here, is that it exists within every single one of us, literally right now. To your listeners that are hearing this, there is another degree or several other degrees in the way in which you are operating now that exist inside you right now. And my challenge to that person is to find the access to it without having to go through some kind of a traumatic event or having to hit quote unquote rock bottom.
Leaders are not born in a womb. They are forged through heat, pressure, and a whole lot of sweat. The Fire Forged Leader podcast serves the audience through exploring leadership at work, in the community, and with the family, using a practical perspective and real-life experiences from the host, Steve Baumgartner, and his guests in The Forge. Now, it's time to enter the Forge with the Fire Forged Leader.
All right, today on the Fire Forged Leader podcast, I'd like to welcome the machine, Nick Lavery. Nick is a husband, a father, a patriot, a leader, a survivor, an author. He's a machine, as I already mentioned. I choose to call him a mindset master. And last but not least, above the knee amputee, which doesn't hold him back at all. Welcome, Nick, to the Fire Forged Leader podcast, sir.
Right on, brother. I appreciate the time and the invitation. And that was a hell of an intro. I may have to take a couple notes and roll with some of that moving forward.
Well, those are just the high points. I've watched a lot of stuff about you, listened to a lot of different interviews, been reading this book once or twice. As you can see, my son even initialed the O for you there.
Nice.
Anyways, amazing story, Nick. It's beautiful in so many ways, but I'd really like to start at the beginning, right? Talk about Nick. Of course, everybody can probably tell where you're from due to the accent, but there's a lot more to the story than just that accent. So I'm just going to go ahead and hand it over to you and let us know a little bit about that young Nick Lavery.
Yeah, man. So, I mean, for those that haven't figured it out, I'm originally from Massachusetts. I spent most of my time in and around Boston. And, I guess the highlight, you and I were talking offline a little bit, that I like to share when it comes to my, my childhood and kind of my upbringing is, I moved to a new school, a new town, a new location every year as I was a kid growing up. So from the time I got into preschool all the way up through college, I was living in a new spot. So I was the new kid in school every year as a kid, particularly in grade school is where it was most challenging. And, I struggle with that mostly socially. And, if I was able to even make a friend during a school year, then, I'd lose them because I'd be in a new spot and I'd be the new kid again. So, I mean, I was picked on a lot. And a lot of times people have a hard time believing this because they see me now, right? And I'm like 6'6", I'm like a bigger dude and, SF guy and the cyborg leg and like all the things. And it's like, man, when I grew up, I was the furthest thing from what most people's depiction of me is now. I was this small, undersized, insecure, scared kid that spent most of my days like running from other kids that were trying to kick my ass. Sometimes I get away, sometimes I wouldn't, so my upbringing was a challenge in that light, and I come from an amazing household. My parents are amazing people. My youngest sister is an amazing person. My parents just had us very, very young, and they were just grinding and doing what it took to keep a roof over our head and keep food on the table, and they did do that. So it was a struggle for sure. And I'll close here with just saying that I attest an enormous portion of my resilience and my mental toughness that I have today. And those are attributes that I've leveraged as an athlete, as a Green Beret, both with 2 legs and then with 1. I give a lot of that credit to the way that I was raised and in the environments that I grew up in. And resilience is a skill. And for me, that's a skill that I began learning as a very, very young person.
So in that growing up, I had a hard time socially as a child as well. My path went a lot different for many years up until I was about 22 when I started changing my life. But you talk about having tremendously good parents. I was a product of the foster care system and adoption and things like that. So I took the left road. You took the right road, started working out, that sort of thing. Do you attest that to the way that your parents raised you, or what do you really think set you on that journey of not cowering under the bullying and different things that you had to do, live with, but actually excelling from it?
Yeah, it's a good question. And believe me, during the course of my life as a young person, I strayed off the right path multiple times. Let's just say I wasn't always an officer in the United States Army, so I had plenty of mistakes and a lot of horrible decisions. But to answer your question, I guess more acutely is yeah, I would give both my parents, my mother and father, the credit, and being able to look back with that kind of hindsight and having an amazing relationship with them today, and having these kind of conversations. I can still remember me at the ages of 5, 7, 9, and coming home and upset and in tears, and I have no friends and I just keep getting picked on. And while they were there to support me 1000%, they did an amazing job of letting me work through it and like working through it alongside me. I wasn't overly coddled, especially for my father. It was like, yeah, man, like life is hard. Like, welcome to the world. And this is the way that this goes. So I'm here for you. I will help you. We'll navigate through this together. But I wasn't coddled. And I am beyond grateful for that, because again, had I been, sheltered, or had this bubble built around me that would have me avoiding all of this adversity, then I would not be as equipped as I am today. So I do give them the credit and their foresight to, although they probably wanted to just bundle me up and safeguard me from the world, they didn't do that. And I know that was hard, but they took the hard right over the easy wrong.
That's awesome to hear. And just to give a shout out to my adoptive parents too. I learned a lot of the same lessons from them. But I was already on a path, on a journey, but it was things that I could pull from out of the toolbox later on in life for sure. Mm. So thanks for that testimony on that. Do want to talk a little bit about, I remember in the book, you started pumping iron at an early age, you didn't want to be this scrawny little kid forever. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. And, I think I would say that's a very common segue into, lifting weights for young people. I would say, especially young boys, and struggling socially and trying to find where we fit into this world, and like, what's my thing? And I want to be popular. I want to be an athlete. I want to sit at the cool kid table in the lunchroom, or I just don't want to get picked on. I just want to be confident, and seeking muscle is a route that I would say many of us at least begin to pursue. Some stick with it much longer term and kind of take it, next level to next level to next level. But for me, that was absolutely the reasoning behind it, and my motivation behind it was like, if I'm going to be this new kid and just, struggle and be getting picked on and being bullied, like, well, big, strong guys aren't bullied, like the Incredible Hulk, like no one picks on
Right.
that guy. Right. I'm like looking at professional football players. I'm looking at, Jean-Claude Van Damme and all these like action heroes and Rocky Balboa and, Rambo and John Wayne, like these tough, strong dudes. And I was like, okay, like if I build up myself physically to a point that this will stop happening, like that made sense to me. So that was just my initial kind of outlet to begin somewhat productively working towards some kind of an effect that I was looking for. So that was where it really began for me. And then, of course, as I continue through life, I get really heavily involved in athletics, and, I went to college to play football, and obviously I become, Green Beret. I lived this very physical lifestyle. So the seed was planted out of fear and insecurity. And then as I began to just keep doing it, obviously you learn more, you take it more seriously, and it just becomes part of your life.
So you never really faltered and then came back. It was a steady progression from the time you picked up them first weights.
Yeah, I mean, it's a roller coaster ride. There's ups and downs, and there are times certainly that I took it more seriously than others. But really, once I picked up, my first dumbbell, which for me was probably the age of like 7 or 8 years old, I really didn't put them down for very long. Whether it was because I was playing sports or I just continuously wanted to build up this really strong suit of armor around me to protect the insecurity that I still had within me, even when I was all the way, going into high school and even into college. But yeah, man, once I started, I really didn't stop.
Nice. So you talked about your transition all the way up into special forces, but I remember reading in the book that there is a very key point in time that you determined you needed to go and serve your country and do some good within the military services. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, man. I mean, I began looking at the military when I was in high school, and I was actually looking at the Marine Corps. And again, I wanted to be respected. I wanted strength. Like serving my country really was not part of the equation for me. It was just this undersized, scared kid. I want strength. I want to be feared. I want to be respected. I'm going to become a Marine. That was really as simple as it was. The only thing that stopped that for me was I started getting recruited to play football in college. So that was the only reason why I went to college. I was a horrible academic. I did the bare minimum just to skate by, but I was into sports. So I ended up going to school. I went to UMass, and my sophomore year was 9/11. So, I was watching
Mm.
this event live, as many of us, kind of from our era and beyond, anyone old enough to recognize the gravity of the situation. It's a moment in time that most of us will never forget, where we were, what we were feeling, what we were wearing, the details. It was that emotional. And the anger that coursed through my body when I was watching that was quite strong. And then really the struggle for me was to stay in school or just get out and join the military, because I knew we were going to war. We were going into conflict in some manner, and I wanted to be part of that purely just out of anger. So that was the catalyst for me. And that was really the reason why I came in, even though I had kind of a seed planted prior. It had been several years. So the towers going down on 9/11 was the reason, but it was not intended to be a profession or a lifestyle. I mean, I was going to come in, get to the tip of the spear, kick some ass, get some payback, and then get out and figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. That was essentially the game plan. It was just going to be this short-term kind of stop along my journey. But I learned very, very quickly, once I got to the teams and I began doing the job, that this was much more than this kind of lily pad for me. This was this was a lifestyle that I was about to adopt.
What about it's so attractive for you in the special forces?
Yeah, man. The two things come to mind when you ask that question. One is just the small team environment. So it's you and 11 other guys, and when you are operating in a capacity that's that small, you not only do you get to know each other very, 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 very well, but you're literally putting your life in the hands of another person or two, and you live with them, and it's constant. So the level of camaraderie is quite strong when you are operating in an incredibly small team environment, and oftentimes those teams will stay together with the same people for an extended period of time. So you develop really strong relationships. You get to know each other very, very well. You know each other's families very, very well. It becomes your second, or and oftentimes your primary family. For me, when I first got to the teams, that was my family, and I truly loved those people through and through. So there's that. And then the second thing that comes to mind is the level of responsibility that's placed on us. And we got a lot of special operations units. Obviously, I'm somewhat biased to what the Army Special Forces do because I've been doing it now going on 17 years. But when you're amongst an ODA and you're dropped off into an extremely remote or austere or kinetic environment, and you are tasked to complete a desired end state as is outlined by your senior command. And that desired end state, that intended outcome, is almost outside the realm of what's practical for 12 human beings to accomplish. But this is what you are, this is what you do, and this is what you're here to do. You've got 6 months to do it, or 9 months to do it, or whatever, but this is what we expect out of you. And the first time you see that, you're like, wait, what? Like, is this even possible? Like my first trip in Afghanistan, and I'm like, we're really expected to do all that in 9 months. And my teammates were like, yeah, this is what we do. And it's like, okay, well, I'm obviously the new guy and I don't really know much, but that seems unlikely. And it's not so much about accomplishing it, which of course is what we're expected to do. It's about being put in the position and given that level of trust and responsibility with what's at stake to operate in such a capacity that will push you beyond what you believe to be reasonable or even practical for a single human being and or a group of 12 human beings to actually be able to do.
Wow. That's kind of sets a whole mindset with that too, right? I mean, you got the short time window to get something done. You got to break it up and really start. You got to start and an end. So you got a vision and you got to start chipping away at it, which, really we'll get into later, but is the essence really of your book, right?
That's it.
So a lot of really interesting stuff as far as your military career, but it always comes down to a couple main points in your story, right? And this is where I don't know, maybe I read it wrong, but I'll just ask you today. It seems like this is really where you started to know who Nick Lavery was when you were starting to go through some of this adversity, right? I remember in the book, you talked about, and you just kind of mention it like it's nothing, but you got shot in the face, shrapnel in your back, and then finally losing your leg. Mm-hmm. And it seems like through that transition is really where Nick started coming alive for you, more so than anybody else. Is that accurate?
I would say that having been wounded the way that I was forced me to find parts of myself that I didn't know existed, but were very much there the entire time, is how I would probably answer that. And what I mean by that, man, is, by the time that I was wounded, I was 30 years old, and I had a solid list of accomplishments, things that I was certainly proud of. College athlete, I was the honor graduate of the Special Forces Qualification course. I became a Green Beret. You know, I was an asset to my team. You know, these things as a two-legged guy that you could look back on and say, man, that took a lot of really hard work, and that took a lot of discipline, and that took a lot of sacrifice and a high degree of work ethic, you know, and all these things. And that is true. However, when you lose a leg and you decide immediately that not only are you going to go back to doing exactly what it is you were doing, but you're going to get better at doing it. And that's where I had set my standard. That was the target goal. That was the mission. But when you do that, and then you begin navigating towards that, you realize just how challenging it's going to be. And that becomes apparent very, very quickly. Aside from the fact that no one had successfully done it before, like forget that for a second. You actually begin living your journey and you realize like, wow, is this possible? You know, I don't know. Maybe there is a reason why no one's done this before. And you start to have all those, you know, questions and self-doubt that starts to come in. I was required to take things up to another stratosphere across all sectors of life. So yes, it took a degree of discipline to do the things that I did with two legs. That was going to have to go up 10 notches. Yeah, I had to have a high degree of work ethic and productivity and production to do these things as two legs. That was going to have to go up by a factor of 10x. You know, so all these things that they had to be amplified drastically. And it wasn't automatic, but eventually I was able to continue to level up and kind of find those next gears and keep going and pushing and pushing and pushing. But what I like to emphasize here when this topic comes up, and I'm glad you asked because it's a great question, is as I started, the ability to take the foundation that was there and increase that capacity was in me the whole time. All right. It's not like when I was in the hospital at Walter Reed, some mad scientist walked into my room and like rammed a metal spike into the back of my head and uploaded work ethic like Neo in the Matrix. You know what I'm saying? Like it was already there.
Right.
It just, I had never tapped into it prior. And I would argue that it's because I never had a need to tap into it prior. You know, when I set my sights on something that was this crazy in a lot of sense, or just so out there, and I'd set the bar so high, the only way that it would be even remotely possible was to force myself to the, you know, those next echelons of these character traits and these attributes in life. So it was there the whole time. For me, it took getting my legs shot off by a machine gun to get access to it. But the point I want to make, and I'll emphasize it here, is that it exists within every single one of us, literally right now. To your listeners that are hearing this, there is another degree or several other degrees in the way in which you are operating now that exist inside you right now. And my challenge to that person is to find the access to it without having to go through some kind of a traumatic event or having to hit quote unquote rock bottom.
Yeah, and it's interesting you just mentioned rock bottom because I'm an addict. When I was 22 years old, I was looking at prison time for selling and manufacturing drugs. You know, got plenty of years sober now, but that's exactly what it took for me too, was hitting that rock bottom. And the experience is the same. Not the experience, but the hitting that point to be able to rebound was the same. Different experience, of course. So it's interesting how that translates through different people's experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Taking a couple steps back, Nick, you know, just for the audience who hasn't heard of Nick Lavery before, can we rewind and go back into the story about how you lost your leg?
Yeah, man. I mean, I'll give kind of the quick version and you can dive in wherever you want. You know, we're on a 6-month deployment. We had been there about 5.5 months. So we're about ready to leave. We're getting ready to go on our joint operation with our dedicated Afghan commando partner force, as well as some conventional guys, which was quite common for us to do. Getting ready to roll out, just finished our final mission brief, final comms checks, getting ready to go. And a member of the Afghan National Police Force jumped up on the back of a Ford Ranger pickup truck, and he unloaded into me and my friends using a PKM. It was a belt-fed machine gun from about 25 or so feet away. Considered the most catastrophic insider attack that we know of. There were 12 U.S. casualties, including 3 killed, and another dozen or so Afghan casualties killed or wounded. To me, most of the damage was to my right leg, and the docs estimated I took 4 or 5 rounds to my right leg, and it ripped it to shreds, shattered my femur into about 30 pieces, and severed my femoral artery. And for all intents and purposes, I should have died that day without question. In fact, this case study is one that's studied in med schools throughout the country because it's an anomaly, and there really is no biological or scientific explanation into how I was able to survive, given the circumstances that was going on during the event. So I treated myself initially with a couple tourniquets. Eventually, some of my teammates treated me. I was medevaced out about an hour and a half later because it was an ongoing firefight. So this dude opened fire, but this was a coordinated attack. So as soon as he did that, then we began receiving rockets and machine gun from outside of our perimeter from about 25, 27 enemy fighters. So full on ambush. So it took the guys on the ground that were still capable, most of which was our infantry guys that we had attached to us. We had a squad that were there with us, and those guys really saved our asses because most of the team guys were down. And so it took them about an hour and a half to get the situation on the ground under control, where they could stop bringing in medevac birds to start pulling us out, and pulled me out. Eventually, I got into front of some doctors. Eventually, made my way to Walter Reed. And at that point was where they just started incrementally amputating my leg piece by piece by piece as they were fighting the infection that had set in. And I'd be in surgery 3, sometimes 4 times a week. They'd cut more out. I'd wake up, more of my leg would be gone. And I would just rinse and repeat that process for the course of, 6 or so weeks, about 35, 37 something surgeries, eventually leaving me with, what I have here today.
So as I was reading the book, of course, you're a pretty humble guy. You talk about throwing on a couple tourniquets, but it was a lot deeper than that. As you explained it in the book, I remember, different points in time that, you wake back up. I got so many minutes to live. This is, your training really carried you through there. And I remember the point in time when, basically you're throwing a ball of gauze up in your leg to stop that bleeding, to try and save the minutes that you have left. So I don't want anybody to think that, it was, you were laying there, waiting on a chopper to come. This was active the whole time.
Yeah, man. And you said it, and my teammates saved me in more ways than one. I was trained very well by our medics on TCCC and how to do casualty combat care. And so without them telling me what to do prior and forcing me to train on it over and over and over and over again, I wouldn't have done what I did. So tourniquets go on, and that's a result of deliberate training and multiple repetitions. And then, as you mentioned, the internal pressure dressing, which is something that, again, we train on. It's certainly different when you're doing it on yourself. I can assure you, it's a weird thing to see when you're ramming your fist inside your own leg to try to get direct pressure on the femoral artery. But again, like my teammates and my medics and our seniors and, those guys, they're the ones that just told me what to do months leading up to me having to do it. And yeah, man. And so it was very active. It was an active 90 minutes of a lot of stuff going on. And I can remember, as I was kind of going in and out of consciousness, waiting on the bird to show up, I had done all the interventions that there was to do, so I'm assuming I got maybe a minute or 2 left before I'm dead. And I just kind of drug myself over to where our senior medic was. His name's Elliot. And he took a round through his calf. So he had a tourniquet on, and he was relatively fine. He's in a lot of pain. I can tell you, tourniquets save lives, but they are incredibly painful. It's brutal. Like, you almost
I
want
can imagine.
that thing removed, and you're just like, if this kills me, it kills me. I mean, it is incredibly uncomfortable. So he's dealing with that, and he's in agony. And, I just like crawled myself over to where he was and just decided, like, what better way to spend the last minute I have on earth is just trying to distract him from the discomfort he's dealing with, and, thank him for everything he did for me, and the teammate he was. And, obviously, as luck would have it, because I absolutely nailed my femoral artery with that internal dressing, obviously things didn't end the way I thought they would.
That's amazing, though. I mean, you're counting down your minutes and still you're in service to another one of your teammates. I got to commend you for that, Nick. That is absolutely awesome. Which brings me to the next thing that I really want to highlight out of your book. And, I've heard you on different podcasts mention this, but the man who jumped in the back of that Ranger and shot up your leg, I've heard you talk about this a couple different times about how the tactic of the enemy was to set these guys up where it was either their family or their teammates. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and this was something that I learned, months later. Once the rest of my team got home, they got back to Bragg and they got their stuff downloaded, and they came to see me in Maryland. I was at Walter Reed not long after. So I was still inpatient. I was still going through surgeries, but the boys showed up and it was great. And they told me what kind of some of the intel about what had happened. And like you said, the Taliban at the time, which is who we were fighting mostly, would deploy this tactic where they would put a person in a position between a rock and a hard place. And that's kind of a simple way of saying it, because they would just go into the house of this person who they knew had access to us. And they would say, hey man, here's the deal. You got two options. Option A is we brutalize your entire family right now in front of you, and then we slaughter them, and then we slaughter you. Option B is you go do this act for us. And if you do that, your family will be taken care of. You're dead either way. I'm going to make that crystal clear. You either die right now or they will kill you. But if you go with option B, your family will be taken care of. And this was an incredibly common tactic, which is why insider attacks, or we refer to as a green on blue, were so popular and prevalent at that time, because it worked. And what made it work is the credibility that was established, because they actually would follow through on that and they would take care of the families. So when I learned that, it allowed me to discharge a lot of anger and rage and the sense of betrayal that I had stewing, and yeah, these guys are Afghans and, it's business. But when you're over there working with these people and you're going into harm's way together and you're teaching them tactics and weaponry and survival skills, and they're learning from you, and you're going into combat together, and that's the life of a Green Beret, and that's what we did. And that is all very real. So even though you may never entirely trust some of these people the way you would, your father or your brother or your best friend, a relationship is established. Okay, let me make that incredibly clear. United States Army Special Forces, the Green Berets, we are in the relationship business. That is what determines our success or not. So because of that, and then knowing that it was a guy that I had taught how to use the machine gun, that he shot me and my friends with, killed 3 of my friends and wounded myself and another 8. That's tough. That's a tough pill to swallow. It was difficult for me. So I was really angry and on an emotional roller coaster for a bit when my guys came and told me about what had happened. Instantaneously, within that same minute of that conversation, I could just feel this like relief just come over me. And it was like, even though I didn't have then the family I have now, right? I'm now married with 2 small boys. even though I didn't have the family I have now, I could still empathize with that person, husband and father of 7 kids and 9 guys with guns kick down your door in the middle of the night. And there may be some people out there that hear this and say, well, why wouldn't he just fight back? It's like, well, that's really easy to say, but it's entirely different thing to try to do without a real practical way of fighting back. You're going to do whatever it takes to protect your family. And I would do the exact same thing if I was in that situation under those circumstances. So I was able to empathize with that situation. And it was like, man, I get it. And I don't have any hard feelings. And it was just this wave of relief, and it allowed me to relinquish that, which was important because I had a lot of work to do, and stewing in that would have done me zero good. So again, just another example of what my teammates did for me just in that one moment in time. They really enabled me to discharge that weight that I had carrying, that anger I had carrying, and I could focus on target and start moving forward.
That's amazing. I mean, this is a man who did completely destruction, right? Took 3 of your friends, also took your leg, and I can't imagine the feeling that you got when you forgave this man, but I can imagine it was like a wave just rushing over you when that feeling hit. That's amazing. I also remember one real critical point in the book too, when you were actually getting loaded onto the helicopter and one of your teammates was right there. And yeah, so the point that I'm talking about. I'll let you explain it rather than me butchering it.
Yeah, no, it's I smile and I nod because it's just, again, and I probably sound like a broken record here, brother. It's just the truth. It's just another example of, my teammates saving me and giving me something to work with, giving me a tool to work with. And, like I said, I was on the battlefield about 90 minutes before I was able to get loaded on a bird. And when I initially had been hit and I knew what I was dealing with, a severed femoral artery, I was convinced I was going to die. There was no question in my mind about it at all. I'm going to work. I got work to do. I got options. I'm going to continue to work at this thing, tourniquet, pressure dressing, the whole thing. But you will die today, right? Was no question for me at all. So I'm getting loaded on the bird. And one of my teammates, his name's Adam, he grabs me by the face after he loads me, puts me down. And it's loud, the rotors are going, sand's everywhere, people are screaming, and he grabs me by the head, and we and I are like nose to nose, right? He's directly on top of me, and he's screaming, and he's telling me he loves me. And he and I went through the Q course together. We've been working together for a long time, and this dude is my boy. And I know what he's doing, right? And I've been in and out of consciousness, but I'm in the moment with this guy, and I know what he's doing, right? He's saying his last goodbyes to me, and we've been through a lot of shit together, and we had an amazing relationship, still do to this day. And I wanted to be in this moment with him, right? Like, dude, I know what you're doing, and I want to reciprocate with whatever I can to like give you this last gift that you're asking for. And something prevented me from being able to do that. And I noticed the position of the sun had moved enough to where I noticed that it had moved. I had no idea how much time had gone by. But again, I get hit. I see the damage within a minute. I think I got about 8 or 9 minutes to live. Well, the sun had moved enough where I knew that certainly considerable longer had gone by than 8 minutes. So while I'm trying to be in this like connection point with my boy Adam, I'm like, wait a minute, how much time had gone by? Like, how long has it been since I was hit? Because, I'm in and out of consciousness the whole time. I have no idea how much time had gone by, but I knew it had been a while. It's certainly more than 9 minutes. So it was in that moment where I was like, you know what, man, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this is something that you can battle through. Maybe this isn't the end of the line. And the gift that Adam gave me in that moment was this surge of energy where I could feel it coursing through my body. And it was like, all right, you're now going into combat mode right now. Like, it's game time. You are in a game, and it's time to get your mind right and get in this game. And even though I wasn't shooting a rifle, and even though I couldn't see my enemy, I was in a fight, and it was time to stop throwing some punches. And I do not have that revelation without Adam doing what he did. So again, just another example of what a dude that I'm alongside of did for me, just in these chaotic moments. There's stacks of these things, these stacks of these examples. Here's one that I like to emphasize because I had written myself off, and the gift that he gave me was, why don't you take another look at what you think to be certain and reassess and get your head back in the game, and let's go. And he did that, and then therefore I was able to do that.
That's amazing. I think you probably just changed all the listeners' minds on people from Boston as well as special forces, right? I mean, just a tremendous amount of love and appreciation for each other and that team atmosphere. I mean, everybody understands the team thing, right? But they don't realize how tight it is and how much you really rely on each other. We see Rambo movies, right? I know you're on a little bit of a tight timeline here, so I want to kind of fast forward a little bit into your recovery. Just a couple things that I really remember vividly is number one, your yard sale when you were trying to walk on your prosthetic. Uh, I just remember this whole event playing out. And then, just you talked about taking everything up 10 times. And what really sticks out to me when you talk about that is when you're trying to fit your prosthetic and how you got to keep your nutrition and everything in line to make sure that you got a proper fit at all times. So maybe touch on those two topics and, just talk about that recovery if you could.
Yeah, man. So the yard sales, it's a funny story, and what makes it funnier is I'm obviously from Boston, which it's a law. If you know this, it's written into Massachusetts legal code that you will be a Boston Red Sox fan, right? I think actually, if you violate that law, it's punishable by death. So clearly, I'm a Red Sox fan, and on this particular day, a bunch of the New York Yankees was at Walter Reed. And, at the time when I was there in 2013, Walter Reed was packed, and it was crazy the amount of people that were in there, service members, families, dealing with a variety of different injuries and circumstances. So, I mean, we would get, actor, Hollywood, athletes, the presidents, four-star generals, senators, congresspeople. I mean, it was constantly these DVs and VIPs would be coming through. And on this particular day, it was the Yankees. It's a funny kind of ironic point that regardless of who was there, I had no interest in it. And my physical therapist, Kelly, who I talk about in the book, did an amazing job of like protecting me from kind of the dog and pony show stuff that would be going on. When I was in that training facility, man, I was clocking in and it was game time and I could not be bothered by anybody. Didn't make a difference to me who was there. On this day, the Yankees were there and I was doing some weighted walking, just laps around the indoor track that's there at the training facility. And I'd only been on my prosthetic for, maybe a month or two, still raw, but I'm pushing it, I'm pushing the envelope, every day. And it was one of those days where as many days would end up with me on the ground for whatever reason. And yeah, this has happened while I was carrying a barbell with some weight over my head. And it was just a total disaster. Like the barbell went one way, I went the other way. My prosthetic fell off my body and went flying the other direction. I knock over another physical therapist and I knock over a bunch of med balls. Those are all like binging around the whole gym. And like the whole place stops because it was just this like giant dude just like causing this disaster scenario. So it was funny. What I like to talk about with this example or anytime that I would fall down, which happened constantly, is Kelly's reaction. So Kelly was my physical therapist, and her reaction to this was literally nothing. She's like sitting on like a plyo box on the other side of the gym, just watching me do my thing. And this yard sale event happens. And I remember looking over at one point, I kind of did a quick assessment of myself, fingers, toes, whatever number I had left. Right. Okay, cool. I'm good. And I look over at her and she hasn't budged. Like her facial expression, hasn't moved an inch. And you may think that if you saw that, your instinct would be to like run over to help. Like, here's this disabled guy. Here's this handicap guy. He only has one leg and he's trying to learn how to use a prosthetic and he just fell down and his leg fell off. And like, oh my gosh, like I need to come over and help this person, because most human beings have a desire to help others when they see them struggling. Perfectly natural, perfectly normal. Kelly and the other PTs at Walter Reed were unorthodox. They're the opposite of normal. And the point is not that they're ruthless, heartless, savage assholes. It's that they're not going to hijack you from learning how to get yourself back up after you fall down, because falling down is going to continue to happen, both literally and figuratively, right? Literally, you're going to fall down and be on the ground and have to figure out physically how to get back up, because standing back up with one leg and a prosthetic is different than you would do it if you had two legs. So there's the physical training that she's going to allow me to work through, which is incredibly important. And then there's the more mental training of getting back up after getting knocked down, just in the face of adversity, in the face of challenges, because these things are going to continue to come at you in volume, no matter what it is you're trying to do with your life. Her knowing me, trying to go back to an ODA and back in Afghanistan and back into combat, she knew I needed every rep that I could possibly get at all these different things. So I like to highlight that with her, because again, just another example of another person that was eventually on my team that facilitated the things that you read about me or see me do today, man. It's not, there's countless thousands of people that may not physically be alongside me, but that cool guy picture you see of me, literally the one on the cover of that book right there, Afghanistan 2015, for every cool guy picture you see of me, there's 1,000 people right alongside me that you just happen to not be able to see in that point in time. And then you asked me another question about my rehab. What was it?
The fit of your prosthetic and how you got to keep your nutrition and everything in line, having to level 10 up, just a different stance on being two-legged.
Yeah, man. And, and as a two-legged athlete, as a 20-something-year-old, I could get away with getting pretty sloppy when it came to my nutrition and when it came to my range of motion and when it came to my flexibility and my warm-ups and my cool downs and all these things that strength coaches and physical therapists around the world scream every day at their athletes that it's important to do. Most of us young knucklehead 20-something-year-olds are like, yeah, whatever. Like, you just blow that shit off and you can get away with it. And you can, I was a physical species to be dealt with. And I just was like, I can just train a little harder tomorrow, or I don't really need to do that. And, I would be able to make these shortcuts and make up for it pretty easy. When you lose a limb and you're now dealing with a traditional prosthetic that's in a socket, which is the traditional way that it is attached to your body, your residual limb will go inside of this bucket, right? This little bucket that is form fitted around your residual limb. Well, those sockets are set to a certain size. And what a lot of amputees or those that work with prosthetics will learn very quickly is if your weight fluctuation, your body mass index, if it moves, either shrinks too drastically or gets too big, well, the prosthetic's not going to fit you anymore. Then you got to go back and you got to get a new one made, and you got to get it casted and molded and test sockets and trial runs, and then transition to carbon fiber and then alignment. It's like a whole thing. I mean, it's a multi-phased process to get a new prosthetic made for you. And oftentimes that comes just out of getting sloppy with your nutrition and with your training. So for me, I learned that, man, I need to pay much closer attention to what I'm putting in my body, how I'm using that fuel and just dial in my nutrition as equally, if not more important than the sets and reps and what I'm doing in the gym, because I am 10 times more functional on 2 legs than I am on 1. And I need to be as functional as possible. I need to be as efficient as possible. And again, all this is based on getting back to the teams, getting back to the ODA life, everything, every aspect of every day, every decision I made was rooted in that. So it was like, man, I can't afford to have to get out of this leg and be single legged for 2 weeks while a new one gets made just because I put on too much weight or I lost too much weight, So it took the structure that was already there, because I knew as a 2-legged guy the importance of nutrition, and I ate clean, and I did all these things, but that wasn't good enough anymore. The margin for error for me shrank drastically than I did when I had 2 legs.
It's not just the 20-year-olds either. It's the 48-year-olds who, every morning at 4:30 when they're waking up to do their 15 minutes of mobility, it's like, this is the stupidest crap ever.
Mm-hmm. That's
so
true.
It's not just when you're in your 20s. Anyways, a lot more to unpack there, but I don't want to let you get away without talking about this gem here. We talked a lot about your life, but you didn't write this to be about your life, even though I found a lot of information in there. It's really about helping people find their mission, right? So can you give us a quick synopsis of what you put in this book?
Yeah, man. And I'm glad you mentioned that. And I swear I could scream this from the rooftops, and people will still think they're getting an autobiography, or they're getting, like the Nick Lavery story, and be disappointed. That is actually the most frequent piece of negative feedback I receive, is people want like my story. And as you said, as it is true, that's not what Objective Secure is. I had no desire to write an autobiography. I had a lot of desire to write this. And to answer your question, it comes on the backside of me, getting back into the teams and deploying to Afghanistan as a 1-legged guy, and coming back from that and kind of being thrown into this spotlight, and, having to brief commanders and senators and secretaries of different branches. And it was just the Army and special operations wanted to kind of highlight what we collectively accomplished. And I fought that tooth and nail for a while. And I learned very quickly that when a 4-star general asks you to do something, he really isn't asking you shit. It's a nice way of ordering you to do something. So I would do as I was told, of course, and I would do the thing. And I bring that up because it was just kind of the gradual, slowly painful, gradual transition into kind of getting out into the public space is a little bit more and a little bit more, and, social media, and then it just kind of takes off. And I began being asked the question, how did you do this? In varying degrees of that same question. First, a dozen times, and then 100 times, and then thousands of times I'm being asked the same question, and I'm answering the question for people. Like, I want to have that connectivity.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized it was just wildly inefficient. So I just kind of jotted down the answer to that question, through which I learned a lot about myself, because I really hadn't sat down and been like, how did I do what I did? Like, it almost was like a blur, because I was just at 1,000 miles an hour, completely target fixated and obsessed on this one thing. So by virtue of me answering that question with a little bit of depth, I learned a lot about myself and kind of how I did it and what was going on in my life at these times. And I was talking to teammates and strength coaches, and I was checking my training log, and I was referencing my journals, and I was really examining it. So over the course of like 2 weeks, I just put together this outline so that I could answer the question faster. That was the only goal, was just to be more efficient. And I used it that way for years, and it was successful. And people would get that and respond and be like, hey man, this was really helpful. Thank you. I'm like, okay, cool. So this is working. Fast forward to 2020, around July, and, one of my best friends, we played football together in college. He hit me up and was like, dude, I think you need to write a book. And I hung up on him. I'm like, get out of here. I'm not even entertaining this conversation from you right now, dude. He's actually the one that recorded the audiobook with me for those that want to check it out. It's me and my boy Eric. So he keeps at it. He keeps hitting me back. He's like, no, man, I need you to think about this. And then I did think about it. And it's important to note that we're talking July-ish 2020. So we're like the summer of COVID. The gyms are closed. The fight houses are closed. We're doing this weird, like half on, half off work schedule. We're doing all this remote bullshit to try to like stay productive while we're all trapped in our houses. I bring that up because I had this opportunity, where I've got this extra time and energy on my hands that I otherwise would be investing elsewhere. So what am I going to do with it? Well, you know what? I thought about that outline that I had written years prior, and I got my boy who I respect and love, who's like hitting me up repeatedly about writing a book. And I'm like, man, like I kind of have this thing that I've been using. And he's like, I think you just found what the book is. And I said, all right, you know what? It's July. Me and my guys are deploying into Iraq in December. So it gives me about 4 months between now and then. I'm going to commit to it, and I'm going to see what I can come up with between now and then. And I just approached writing the book like I would approach just about anything and just get real operational. I did some quick research, like how long of a book do I think it should be? Like, okay, around 65,000, 70,000 words, give or take. What day is it? July 5th. Okay, do the math. How many words a day do I need to write between now and, mid-November? Boom. And it was just, I'm going to do 550 words, whatever the number was, a day, every day between now and then. And that was it. And you know what I mean? Like, it was hard. And a lot of times it was a grind, and you're sitting there staring at the screen and like nothing's coming to mind. It's like, no, like you're not getting up until this is done. And again, I'm enabled by COVID because I have nowhere else to go. So it's like, there'd be times I'd be sitting in my home office for 7 hours. It would take me 7 hours to like get through getting that 550 down. And there'd be some days that I'd go in and I would just be out of my mind, and I would do 3,500 words, and I'd look up and be like, what the hell just happened? So it is a difficult journey to go on. I challenge anyone out there who is even potentially thinking of it is to give it a shot. Because I'll tell you, when I was writing something prior to writing Objective Secure, it was for either work or for school, and it was a chore, and I absolutely despised it. I would do it because I had to. When you sink your teeth into something that you truly are passionate about, writing becomes a whole different thing. And I learned at the age of 37, 38-ish, whatever I was, that I actually have a passion for writing, particularly when I'm writing about something that I'm passionate about, which is entirely different. So I'm currently working on another 2-3 written publication projects right now. But to answer your question kind of long-windedly, man, Objective Secure is exactly what that initial outline was intended to be. It really does answer the how question. And what inspired me was to take this very militant approach, this operationalized approach in which I used and applied towards myself to get back to doing that as a job and as a profession, and explain it in a way through captivating to many people vignettes and examples, kind of these like holy shit moments, but just use those examples as some context to capture a reader's attention, but then explain this methodology in a way that can be applied to the soccer mom, to the mailman, to the IT tech, to the cop, like whatever your lifestyle is, whatever it is you do, whatever it is you're trying to do, this model works. And I really wanted to explain it in a way in which every person could grasp onto it, grab it, and put it into action immediately. And I'm actually incredibly proud of what it's come out to be, because I do get that feedback now. And the internet's made the world very, very small. So I'll get an email or a message from someone in India that's saying, hey man, this is what I am, and this is what I do, and this is what I'm trying to do. And I read your book and I'm progressing towards that goal. Like, that is all of the reward that I would ever need. So it's quite impactful to me to be able to create that kind of effect on others.
So just for a little bit of personal testimony, I don't know if you can see where my bookmark is here, but this is actually my third time through. I've done a lot of self-improvement, work, following different people's programs, looking at it and what have you. I'm finding this one to be a little bit more intricate. It ties together a little bit better, fills in some of the gaps. So I'm really researching this one tremendously. Definitely recommend this book. If nothing else, just a story of resilience, right? If you got a package that you're already looking at, and self-improvement, by all means, go out and do that. But take a look at what Nick has here, because it is definitely very full. A really good program here. I know you got family duty here, Nick, so I want to go ahead and cut you loose. But where can people find you at that they can enter into your services, find the book, different things like that?
Yeah, man. You just threw it up there. Easy. Boom. Look at you, man. You are not messing around here. You are not messing around. You are a pro. Yeah, I was gonna say, the one-stop shop, the one-stop shop is our website, which it's teammachine.com. Machine is MCHN. It's got links to the socials and the merch and a way to get a hold of me directly. There's business inquiries as well for like speaking engagements and workshops and consulting, but there's a way to get a hold of me, and I do go through that myself. So if you got a question about anything you've heard here today or in general, reach out and hit me up through there. And I'll just close by saying, man, I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate the feedback on the book. That's really at this point what is really kind of gets me going and gets me fired up. And when I sit down to put 350 down to paper on this next project, it's the feedback like that really inspires me to, pursue the next project. So I appreciate the feedback, man, and the support. And thanks for inviting me on. I really enjoyed the conversation. I got a chance to listen to some of your stuff, watch some of your stuff after you reached out, man. And very cool project you're working on here, man. So I wish you the best of luck moving forward, and let's do this again, man. Let's do it again in the future.
Oh, for sure. I do want to mention though that this hat that's been on backwards is one of the cool pieces of merch that you can pick up. It's got some sweat rings in it because I do wear it often. But anyways, great swag. I also recommend the shirts. Love the look of the shirts. Everything's all in black, it seems, which I really love because that's what I wear. But anyways, hit Nick up, teammachine.com. Love the name of that website too, because he mentioned it here, that it is the team around him that makes him successful, just like any other leader. Right. So go check out the website. Nick, absolutely loved having you on. I've been waiting for this conversation for a long time. God bless you, brother, and go take care of that family, man.
Likewise, brother. Let's talk soon. Thanks, man.
All right. Thank you, brother.
You have just experienced the heat and pressure of the forge. Remember, words without action are meaningless. Now, after the heat of the forge, shape your thoughts, quench your brain, then put your new tools to use, adding to your leadership. Tune in next week for more lessons from the forge.